My daughter, when she was about 5 or 6, had an imaginary friend. She used to have little tea parties with this imaginary friend. And I thought this was very strange, and I was a little worried until I discovered, when calling around with friends, that this was quite a normal activity for kids to have. She was an only child at that point. And so Carlos and I mentioned this, and I said, it's sort of a movie idea, don't you think?
It was a female magic friend. Magic friend's name was Sarah. And we couldn't make that work. So, didn't think about it. Then I was having lunch with my dear friend Liz Livingston here in New York, and she said she just had she was an editor of Reader's Digest and just had her first story published, nonfiction, and it was about her daughter's imaginary friend. Daughter's Elizabeth, and the imaginary friend's name is Drop Dead Fred. And that is what clicked.
And as soon as we heard that, we said, well, that's the character's name. What a fabulous title. A male imaginary friend, a male bear, I think it was. And that made the chemistry so much more interesting and invigorating and fun.
We did all sorts of research. There are an immense amount of people who talk about their imaginary friends. And, or I have a dear friend of mine, Steve Burnett, whose mother, Gloria Burnett, had an imaginary friend when she was small. And the mother couldn't stand, this is in Des Moines, Iowa, couldn't stand the fact that she had this. She was little, right? This was back in the 30s or the 20s. And she said, have I got the imaginary friend? And little Gloria nodded. And she took it to the bathroom. You know, it's completely, took it to the bathroom and flushed it down the toilet and traumatized her for 3 years, her daughter. So, and we sort of took that idea and reworked it as the Jack in the Box thing.
It's not right.
The first person we were trying to get to was John Cleese, and we met him, and he wasn't really right at all. And then somehow, I think his agent suggested we look up this guy named Rik Mayall, who I had never heard of. But he was very famous in England at the time for the young ones and all that kind of stuff.
We called Rick's agent, Odd Powell, and Rick and said, here's the idea. And he said, get over to London. This is the one I want to do. And the interesting thing is, Rick had turned down offers. He was offered the lead role, the Val Kilmer role in Willow. Ron Howard directing, George Lucas coming up with the idea, and of course the executive producer. And he said no. And all the major roles in that period were offered to him. He refused to do them. I think mainly because he wanted to develop something, a character that would be his own, as opposed to something else that he would just slip into.
You picked up a piece of broccoli, put it in your mouth and went, oh, what a lovely piece of broccoli. I can't believe it, it's beyond disgusting.
And that's how it came about, and we sat down and wrote this script. And so this was fun to do, and it was enormous fun to write that script.
We would sit down, and he would act out every role, and as it developed, every sequence. And you name it, he would jump on pianos, he would, all the characters, and they just kept evolving. And Tony and I handled some of the other characters and the basic storyline. But Drop Dead Fred was created out of the whole cloth by Rik Mayall, every single moment.
He suggested things that had never even occurred to us. And it was wild and off-the-wall stuff, and we thought, oh, that sounds good. And of course we immediately claimed them as our ideas, right? But lots of that with him.
And he'd say things like, we'd say, well, you know, we're going to have the best friend on a houseboat. And he'd sit there and he'd pace back and forth. And then suddenly he said, right, we're going to sink the houseboat.
And we said, of course we'll sink it, you know, because we that was the last thing we'd think, and then we thought, how are we going to do that? But again, that was somebody else's job. But you know, that's Rick. Of course we'll sink it.
There was a time where he called me it was about 8 o'clock in the morning, and he said, you know the opening scene when, let's have the mother read the daughter a fairy tale, and then she just says, what a pile of shit. He said, that sets it all up. We said, great idea. The only problem with the idea was that Tony and I didn't think of it.
What a pile of shit.
So there was a lot of Rick in there, and his suggestions, which initially sounded quite mad, were brilliant.
Rick did not want us to show it to anybody for financing until he felt, Rick was a perfectionist, and the comedy had to be right, especially his role. I mean, the beats had to be there. What you see on film was a lot of it. I'd say a good 80% of it was actually done in London long before we even went into rehearsal in Minneapolis, much less shoot. in the film there. And so he just felt that it had to be right before it was shown to anybody. And finally, after one time we were there, we decided to take it to the working title, which is not the working title of today. Working title then had done 2 movies, or 3 movies, very small. None of them made money. The one was My Beautiful Laundrette. Another one was A Tall Guy, which, by the way, they wanted Rick for the lead, and he turned it down. And so we decided to go to the working title because at one point our agent, with our knowledge, but nonetheless, took it to Disney. And Disney said, we want this for Goldie Hawn, and Rick Mayall can't be involved, and because it's going to be a Disney picture, and Goldie Hawn had a picture deal there. So we stuck to our guns. We said, no. I mean, Rick is perfect for this, and we'll just make it a different way. So we went to working title.
And then I remember we called Tim Bevan, who was then beginning to make films in England, and said, we have a script and Rick Mayall wants to do it. And he said, are you sure you've got Rick Mayall? We said, very sure, he's sitting right here. Come on over. And Tim was an enormous fan of Rick's. So that's how it all sort of came together.
And then the interesting thing happened, which was, where are we going to make it? Because originally, Tony and I thought, well, we'll make this in London. I mean, Rick Mayall's known there. We'll get an English actress to play opposite him as the girl. And Rick said, absolutely no way. If we do that, my debut on world cinema is going to be a little English movie, and I don't want that. We're going to shoot in the United States. And then Tim Bevan said, well, if we do that, well, let's use an English actress, because after all, you're the imaginary friend of somebody, you've got a British accent, you're not going to have an American actress. And Rick said, no, we're going to use an American actress. And Tony and I seconded that opinion and really stuck by it, because we said, we need an American actress for US distribution. And it's not going to work with 2 Brits somewhere in the United States. It just isn't. It's still going to be a British movie.
We were looking around for who would play the lead woman, right? Elizabeth. And there was some back and forth about who would be right. And then Phoebe Cates just was totally right for it.
I knew Phoebe since she was 12 years old, and tried to use her in a picture about 10 years before this. And finally, she lost out to Cynthia Nixon for the role. But I knew her, and I would run into her every now and then and said, Phoebe, one day we're doing the work together, I promise. So when the opportunity came up with Drop Dead Fred, I got her the script and said, please. And she said, I'll do it. Because again, one of the problems was nobody knew in the States who Rick Mayall was. And she did.
Charles isn't coming.
What do you mean?
I wrote the note.
And then it was a matter of who would play the various parts after that. And when they said Marsha Mason would like to play the mother, I thought, Marsha Mason, my God, she's an enormous star, and she'd been nominated 4 times for the Best Actress and all that. And then somebody said, Carrie Fisher's going to play the best. Wow, we've got a real movie here. And then Tim Matheson was on board and everything. And names just kept coming. And I thought, wow, this is bigger than we imagined, really.
I was just admiring your dress.
Bridget Fonda's in it because she is one of the best friends of Phoebe Cates. And so she came as a favor and played the slutty mistress of Tim Matheson. I said, this role is really different for me. She said, no, playing the slut is always the best. She said, I love playing sluts. Ate de Jong, who's Dutch, working title, there was a woman by the name of Sarah Radcliffe, who then was a partner of Tim Bevan, and she found him.
She had just seen a film of his called Highway to Hell. And we watched it, and I thought, oh my God, this is a serious, dark, crazy movie. And we sat there cringing, and Carlos and I watching this, thinking, this is the guy they want. And we thought, oh God, it's all going to die right here, because nobody's going to want this guy to direct a comedy.
Both Tony and I had a problem with it, because we thought that a comedy with a Dutch director was kind of incongruous, oxymoron time.
So we had a Dutch director, and Dutch not necessarily famous for their sense of humor, was on board.
But it worked out fine.
That's so namby-pamby.
And there was something wonderful about Ate from the get-go. And he said, this is the film we're doing, and this is the script, and I want no hanky-panky. And I remember when they interviewed some actress, and she said, well, I can't possibly say these words. And and she was quite famous, this actress, I won't mention her name. And he said, thank you, goodbye. He was a real stickler for what we had written and what he'd signed on to do.
Couldn't be easier. Respected the writing a lot. He respected Rick, the talent. He let Rick Rick had a quote about himself, which is, "Let the pony run wild." And he completely understood it, and he just shot a lot of things that Rick did. And Rick would do every take differently, and he'd throw things at the situation differently. And there's a couple times, if you watch the film again, you'll see that a couple times the actors are just like, what?
Thank God for Rick, because he was the engine that drove it all. The enormous energy and the tremendous appeal that he had to the character, who wasn't just crazy, you know. There are scenes in it where he is very, very touching. It's a very lovely nuance that he could bring to certain scenes. And that was unexpected. But he is responsible, I think, singly, for the success of the film.
Yeah! What happened to you?
Each day was an adventure. Each day, Rick Mayall was at the top of his game, and he gave it his all. He gave it 1,000% every single day.
Cobwebs.
Suddenly, he'd come up with, cobwebs, and he'd slide underneath the legs of Marsh Mason, and there's like cobwebs and things like that. And everybody was going like, it was completely imaginative on his part at that moment. Begone, evil one was another moment in that same kitchen scene. Also in the kitchen scene, Rick Mayall's parents came to visit, and his father was a Shakespearean scholar. He taught English literature, and he and his mother came to visit the set. And it was the day that we shot the face in the fridge, and it comes out, it looks like a pancake, large and all that. And his father looks at his son and is completely horrified. And he just turns to anybody who would hear him, and he says, "What has showbiz done to my son?"
The mega bitch squashed my head!
One of the problems was everybody thought, well, if Rick's funny, I got to be funny too. And they all had to be told by Yatta, no. This thing only works if everybody plays it straight, and nobody else gets to make jokes.
It can be really sweet sometimes.
Phoebe is beautiful. Well, she was almost the complete opposite of Rick in that she was very sort of here, and this craziness, this crazy person with the red hair and the green thing, but she just kept it straight while Rick was, bouncing off the walls, which was wonderful to see that juxtaposition of these two people doing the same thing, basically.
She loved it. She loved Rick. She also came up with a lot of, some of Rick's stuff. And during rehearsals, we were rehearsing the restaurant scene. And she said, what would be much more effective if sometimes you see Rick talking to me and sometimes you don't. And so there's a sequence where she holds a glass and then suddenly you don't see Rick, and she mimics the whole thing as if Rick was doing it. That was all Phoebe's idea. And it's one of the highlights, I think, of the comedy set pieces.
I kind of felt like I was back in high school again.
That beautiful scene where Drop Dead Fred finally says goodbye, kiss me and say Drop Dead Fred. That whole scene and just the mood that she set, and on purpose. And I remember Tony and I were just off camera at one point. She said, I need to change a couple lines here to make this really that much more effective. Go with it. And she tried it for a couple takes, and we got a marvelous take out of that. It was all her.
But I want you to come back with me.
That's just tough. You have to go alone.
I don't remember any upsets. I don't remember anybody storming off the set or anything. It was as smooth as anything. And it was a nice set, and there were nice people. I mean, Marsha Mason is a great close friend today, and that's 25 years on. And everybody had a good time, and the crew were all good fun. And it was a very easy shoot, I think.
I forgot to give you something.
The actual world premiere was back in Minneapolis where we shot the movie. And the governor declared Drop Dead Fred Day. The governor would soon lose the Democratic primary, probably, we think, because he declared Drop Dead Fred Day. And there's a theater called the Orpheum Theater there, which is one of those big old movie palaces that had fallen into disrepair. And the city of Minneapolis renovated it in time for the world premiere. And it still stands. It's now it has concerts and all the rest of it. It was just for that film. And it was a big charity fundraiser and all the rest of it. And we're there, and Rick Mayall's there. Rick Mayall's interviewed by the local Minneapolis television station prior to the opening, and he said, "Well, Rick, did you like Minneapolis? What'd you think of it?" He said, "Oh my God, it's far better than London. You know, you walk out of Harrods in London, you see dog shit everywhere." And of course, American television, you don't say that. And they said, "We're going to cut to commercial right now." And so Rick was at the height of his game, and they invited us all on stage prior to the screening, and I delivered the writer-producers. You know, this movie's about an imaginary friend, but we made so many friends, real friends in this city, and it was a huge applause. And then, thank God I was on first, because Rick Mail gets on and basically takes over the room. And he does a 5 to 6 minute stand-up comedian routine. And he's done it so well, so many times, that he just blows the place apart. I mean, the place goes nuts. It was a concert or something, rock star time. And the movie starts, and everything, beginning with "What a Piece of Shit," gets a big laugh. But the laughter only builds. People are laughing at the chairs in the room. I kid you not. I mean, it was just an amazing experience. And Rick had set it all up. You know, Rick Mail always said, "Always consider me brilliant. It just makes your life a lot easier." And he was brilliant. He was absolutely amazing.
Oh, I love those breaky noises.
The film was sold by Working Title's foreign sales agent abroad. So, for example, to Australia. And the guy who bought it in Australia made more money than any of us did from the picture. He made millions, because it was the #1 independent movie for 8 weeks. So he actually made a fortune from it. But it got sold to all these different markets. And it was amazing. To this day, we get residual checks from Norway, Scandinavia, Japan. It still does very well in these markets. But the US was a special case. And the idea was Polygram ultimately financed the movie. And the first people who wanted it were the Weinstein brothers. And we had a meeting with Harvey and his brother, Robert, about it. And they knew Rick Mail. They were big Anglophiles, and they really wanted to do it. But then Bob Shea got involved with New Line, and they just made a much better offer to Working Title and Polygram. And so they went with New Line. And New Line didn't know how to sell it. That became clear pretty obviously. Because is it a children's movie? Is it a movie for young adults? And we always wrote it as a movie for people in their 20s, you know, Harry meets Sally time. But it became clear that it was sort of not of those worlds.
I had no idea what the audience for this was. I really didn't. Maybe Tim Bevan, who decided to do it, had an idea. I never was quite sure what the age group was or anything that would find this appealing. But I think it did find its audience eventually.
That's great. You see, when something's not working right, the best thing is to tear it apart to make it better.
Because of the success of it, we were asked to do a sequel, and we worked with Rick again on writing a sequel. But he was a little hesitant about doing it again. I think he thought, I've done it, and I want to do something different.
Rick didn't want to do that. So we actually auditioned the then unknown Jim Carrey for the role. And he wanted to do it, but Polygram couldn't get its financial act together to make him an offer before they did for Ace Ventura. Otherwise, we'd have had Jim Carrey, who was desperate to do it. And then there was another sequel that we went to London for that was financed by Working Title and then Focus Pictures. And that we tried to do basically a real sequel. Now Rick was involved. And it was shortly after Rick's quad bike accident. And he just didn't have the emotional energy to do it. And so that sort of petered out. And then there was the last version, which is Universal, because this is showbiz after all. I mean, crazy things happen.
Was Russell Brand said that this was his favorite movie, and he was an enormous fan of Rick's, and that he would like to remake it.
But Russell Brand did a movie called Arthur just prior to that. Arthur flopped, and Universal said, well, if we do it, we're not going to do it with Russell Brand. So it never got done.
But what was fascinating to me, and it just goes to show you about this blog thing and how it has become around the world this fabulous movie. I mean, these kids talk about it like this. And it was Russell Brand. He should not be doing that. Rick Mail had its own stamp, and Russell Brand is no Rick Mail or whatever. But most of the blogs were from young people who said this is the greatest movie ever made.
Snotface, wake up!
As I say to people all the time, if I had a dime for every time somebody has said, when you say Drop Dead Fred, my favorite film, if I had a dime for every time I've heard that over my life, be as rich as Bill Gates. It's quite extraordinary to me that people will say this. And when I say, well, surely, you know, when you were a kid, The Wizard of Oz, and they look at me with such bewilderment, Wizard of Oz, are you insane? No, Drop Dead Fred. So I've never quite understood it. I think it's terrific and it's very interesting, but I never thought it would be this cult thing that it's become. Never.
The secret to this film is that, yes, it's got crazy stuff and it's got that Rick Mail manic, fabulous comedic energy, but the secret of the film is that it has a heart. And that's one of the things that when people come up, as a myriad of people do, to ask Phoebe, ask Tony, ask Rick when he was alive, this is my favorite movie, all that. And one of the reasons that it is so popular is that a lot of women in their 20s and 30s have come up to me and said things like, this movie has saved my life. When I was divorcing my husband, I just looked at this movie over and over again. And this isn't like a one-time thing. I've heard this so many times. And it has everything to do with the heart. That this film really does, it's empathetic, there's pathos to it, there really is genuine loss, and that really is more than anybody else, Rick and Phoebe, who managed to squeeze that out of the film and make it work.
Fred.
Yeah, Fred just went out of me. Oh, I should never have let my mother know how much she could hurt me.
She didn't want to do this, and I asked her personally, would she consider doing it? And she said, no. I made a promise to myself that when I quit, and I didn't want anything more to do with the business. She turned down Gremlins, doing the same Blu-ray thing for Gremlins, and Fast Time at Richmond High, and there was one other movie I can't remember. She just said no to all of them. Totally retired from film. I see her from time. She owns a little store up on Madison Avenue. It's a little gift shop, and it's quite lovely. I've been in there several times, and she's there. I'm not sure of the reasons, but I think she said to me, I've been doing acting, and she had been a model, because she's so beautiful, you know, since she was a kid. And she just got tired of it, I think. And I guess as you get a little bit older, the competition gets tougher and how you compete with other actresses for roles. And I think she just decided, this is my take on what she told me, was that she just decided she didn't need to do it anymore.
What did you say?
She said I'm not pretend. What are you, deaf?
Even after Drop Dead, Rick wasn't extremely well known here. But I certainly tried to make other films with him. Rick Mail movies. One about the invention of Viagra, and which basically Pfizer, who owns the trademark for it, said, this movie comes out, we'll sue you. So the BBC, who actually was behind this, said, we're not going to do this.
Oh, this is great. Stuck in a truck with two girls.
I collaborated with Rick on his last screenplay, his last writings, and it was a modern-day retelling of Oliver Twist, present day. Of course, we would play Fagin, and Fagin was an app on an iPhone, and he taught kids how to steal using the app. And we actually developed it. I have a high-tech guy in San Francisco who created the app with Rick's face and everything on it to use as an example. And once again, Rick was, it was really some of his best work in terms of humor. He was on top of his game, and he did not want it shown until the time was right. And we had the BBC interested in financing, assuming Rick was involved, which of course he was. And then, sadly, he died.
He was a very charming, easy person. Sweet, deep down, with the craziness aside, and he could turn it on like that, the crazy stuff, but a very sweet and kind, considerate person.
It was a complete shock. It really, really was. It was a loss. I actually sort of, I never really had like a depression in my life. I'm a very optimistic person, and for several months I couldn't shake the fact that Rick had died. It was a very sad time for all of us. I'm very close to Rick, and to his wife and his family, and they were like family to me and me to them. And It was always, so it really was a death in the family.
Now. Did it? I told you it'd work. Look, it's brilliant.
It was a lot of fun. It really, really was. I'm very, very proud of it. My favorite Drop Dead Fred consequence was the symposium in Vienna of Sigmund Freud festival where people got up and read intellectual essays about Drop Dead Fred that I wish I could have seen. Taking Rick to.
Well, great fondness, really, to get something as, well, I don't know, important in a way that you know, on one's obit, I'll say, you know, might mention he was the one responsible for Drop Dead Fred. It's nice to have that on the resume, actually, because the things I've done since then are so not Drop Dead Fred-ish. So it's wonderful to have that.
It's so much fun being part of it. It really is. I've been one of the creators of it, and its legacy. It's really quite wonderful.